I would improve the lives of Northern Kentuckian by changing the SEEK formula and fully funding public education in Kentucky. Um, Education is so important for our state and to uplift our state and to get people into substantial jobs that they can have good incomes so that they can make a fair wage. Education is not the only way that a person can get a fair wage by 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 fully funding public education and bringing more money to public education. The trades area and vocational schools would be helped too, to bring where people could get into jobs and be able to make better livings for themselves through higher paying jobs. I would enhance the economic opportunities with substantial job creation too. I would improve infrastructures, bring water and internet to all the homes. I live in Boone County, and part of Boone County where 535 people do not have water, and that's throughout our state. So that would be another issue that I would want to work on for Northern Kentucky, and ensuring access to qualified health care and education. Um, of course, I've already spoken about education, but ensuring access to qualified health care here in Northern Kentucky is important too. And making sure that the housing crisis is addressed in this area too. Supporting the workforce development programs that pay well and offer career growth would be my primary focus.
So one of the first things I intend to do is to join the Northern Kentucky Caucus. We have 18 members right now, and that's a significant portion of the legislature. That's enough to make sure that we actually do punch at or hopefully above our weight class in terms of making sure that Northern Kentuckians' interests are represented, whether that be through infrastructure reforms to this to our systems to make sure that it is more affordable to be a Northern Kentuckian, whether it be in our housing or healthcare arenas. But also, one of the top issues that I intend to do is focus on, frankly, getting the government out of our lives. I'm a believer in the proposition of liberty, which is really as simple as you are entitled to your life, you're entitled to your liberty, which is the ability to, overarchingly, as long as you're not hurting other people or taking their things, do what you will. And if you are prosperous in doing so, it's not the role of government to punish you for that or to take that away. Um, and so that's one of those top issues. And it also comes down to your property rights as well. Those are the big tenets of liberty: the protection of life, the protection of your decisions and the consequences thereof, and the protection of your property rights. Those are the big three issues for me. And part of that will come to another issue, is that of transparency. The bill that I'm introducing on day one is the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. What that would do is it would put every tax increase and every new tax in Kentucky on the ballot. It would make it to where we have to ask for your permission to tax you. The ballot question would tell you what's getting taxed, at what rate, how much it's going to cost the average Kentucky family, and where that money is going to go. So that way, we truly are a government that governs by the consent of the governed. So those are a few of the things that I intend to do to ensure that Northern Kentucky actually gets the representation that it deserves in Frankfort. So I just discussed the first one, but that is the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. I believe transparency and anti-corruption is key. You cannot have a free society if you don't have a transparent and uncorrupt government. Corruption and cover-ups make it less likely that the government actually represents the interests of the people. And one of the first ways that we can ensure transparency is doing it financially. Another issue I look to focus on helping out with that other legislators are already working on is to ban taxpayer-funded lobbying. I cannot think of anything more inappropriate than for the government compelling you to finance advocacy you disagree with. Even if I agree with it, I don't think if you disagree, you should be forced to pay for the advocacy. That's one of the first things that I want to make sure that we fight to get to the finish line. Further, I'm looking for other honest money measures because right now we are in an inflation crisis, and we can take models from, like, say, the Idaho legislature that just allowed for the keeping of gold, silver, and cryptocurrency in their stocks. I'm looking to bring in the Wyoming model too, to ensure that we actually have a free market in money to enable it to where we have more affordability, where we actually have money that retains its value in Kentucky. It worked in Wyoming, it's working in Idaho. I believe it can work here to make sure that there is significant economic opportunity without the negative consequences.
Well, my priorities would be healthcare, education, and the housing crisis. When I talk about healthcare, I'm talking in regards to the certificate of need that has been passed in our state. There's a lot of debate back and forth, and that needs to be reformed and improvements made on the certificate of a need in our area. A lot of people are afraid that if we don't have a monopoly for our healthcare, that the healthcare services would rise. But in actuality, my daughter lives in North Carolina, and there are several cities in North Carolina that have multiple hospitals, and the healthcare still stays affordable for others. Meaning that, like in the Winston-Salem Triad area, there's Wake Forest University. There's other hospitals like Baptist Health, and I think there's like 4 to 5 maybe different hospitals in that area, and their healthcare doesn't the costs don't increase. So the duplication of services is a fear for people in this area. But I think that by bringing Christ Hospital into Northern Kentucky, it would really help make it more competitive and actually help St. Elizabeth stand up to a higher standard. Yes, the certificate of need debate is that it needs to be reformed. Reform needs to happen with it. Maybe it doesn't need to go away completely, but maybe gradually letting it go away by introducing other hospitals into our area would help prevent this monopoly that's going on.
It's desperately in need of reform. I can speak from my own personal experience. Much cheaper for me to seek healthcare in Ohio than it is in Kentucky. That's a sad reality because there's a lot of healthcare workers in Kentucky. But also we have to understand that healthcare workers who live in Kentucky oftentimes cross the bridge because there's just so many more opportunities. I believe that the private veto needs to be done away with. I can't think of a greater consolidation of corporate and state power than letting private competitors veto people from coming in and doing business. So long as you are following federal law, so long as you're following state law and not engaging in any fraud on the people, I believe you should be allowed to do business in Kentucky. I fundamentally believe that certificate of need is in desperate, desperate need of reform because I believe we need to be putting the patients first. And unfortunately, our current system, I don't believe is. I'm voting yes on Amendment 2. I trust parents, and as a result, I believe in school choice. Generally speaking, if a school is working for a child, they're going to keep their child in that school. But there's no such thing as a perfect school for every child. I was lucky that every public school I went to from first grade through 12th grade in Boone County worked out well for me. Went to Burlington Elementary School, Cambrance Middle School, and Connor High School. Those 3 schools were excellent for me. That said, not everyone learns the same way that I do. And I trust the parent to make the decision more than I trust myself to make the decision for other people's kids. I trust the parent more than I trust the government to make that decision for their kids as well. Because fundamentally, that's not my child. That's your child. And I want to empower you to make that decision for your kid.
I will be voting no on Amendment 2. I'm campaigning all weekend. I was campaigning yesterday on voting no and explaining to people what is going on in our Boone County area in regards to a yes and no. Here in Kentucky and Northern Kentucky, what I'm seeing and when I'm out talking to people, from my hairdresser to other people in the community, is that the Catholic Church is actually forgetting that there's a separation of church and state when it comes to politics. And they are requesting for all of their parishioners to vote yes for Amendment 2 so that they can get more money into the Catholic school system. Voting yes is going to hurt Kentucky. So definitely vote no on Amendment 2. And it's going to hurt public education. You know, if people want vouchers for going to private school, then that should be funded separately. There is a surplus of money in Kentucky that is available. And why not fund public education completely? Revamp the SEEK fund so that that can happen. Fund public education, but also allow on the Catholic people to be able to get some kind of discount or voucher to be able to put their kids in private school. But I do not believe that giving $5,000 vouchers out to everybody in the state and allowing people to homeschool is the answer. From my experience as a teacher, homeschooling is not the answer. In some homeschooling kids do excel at it because they're getting the supports that they need at home. But the majority of kids that are homeschooled by families that don't know how to educate, the kids are actually coming in at a lower grade level. So homeschooling is everybody is not the answer. I personally spoke with Chet Han, who heads up the Republican Party here in Boone County, and TJ Roberts. They want to dismantle public education. He thinks everybody should be homeschooled. He was homeschooled in Alaska, so he believes that that homeschooling is the answer. But he doesn't understand that that 90% of the Kentuckians cannot homeschool and don't know how to homeschool properly. So that homeschooling is not the answer for Kentucky. We need public education so that we can teach kids. They don't just get an education of their core values of English and math when they're in school. They get life skills. They learn how to socialize. They learn how to be a citizen of our United States. If you take away public education or downgrade public education, that is going to hurt our state. It is not going to make our state better. Our Kentuckians do not need to be peasants. I honestly feel that the Republican Party is forcing people into be poor and uneducated instead of educating and uplifting our Kentuckians by taking away funds from public education. That is not the answer. Vote no for Amendment 2. Well, I think I covered that in my question, but I'll say that I would explain how the schools, I personally see it every day and have experience in, I've been in over 5 or 6 districts myself, and I see it every day, how public education is not funded properly. By funding public education correctly, then the debate goes away. There's no need to put an amendment to our Constitution of Kentucky on the record to try to give funds to to Catholic school systems. It's not, there is just a small amount of people that are able to even afford in Kentucky to put their kids into Catholic school. And a $5,000 voucher is only a third of the cost to put your kid in Catholic school. And my daughter went to Catholic school. She went to Notre Dame, and my son went to Ryle. But I had no vouchers or no help at the time, and that was back in 2009. I honestly believe that the small amount of money that the upper class would get for the vouchers does not offset the number of families and the 90% of Kentucky that would be hurt by that money being taken away from public education. The money should not come out of public education funds to fund private schools.
So I think that the 2021 House Bill 563 would be the ideal model. The final version that we had on that made it to where if you were in a household that was at or below 175% of the free and reduced lunch program, you were eligible to be a benefit of educational opportunity accounts. And by the way, this didn't just go toward private school tuition. This could be used for tuition, could be used for transportation, books, clothing, anything that you need to be a successful K through 12 student. This was one, it had a provision to ensure that only families in need were able to take advantage of this program. It had geographical constraints to ensure that it was only going to places that had the infrastructure for private schools. And it further ensured that this was able to accommodate for other expenses beyond just tuition. And we have it to spare. The average cost per student nationwide for government schooling, it's in excess of $15,000 per year. The average tuition to go to a private school in the United States, it's less than $7,000 per year. We can afford it. And so I think that's the ideal model, is just making sure. And by the way that this was funded was through individuals making donations, writing it off on their taxes. It was an opportunity to coordinate private charity and coordinating it with families in need to ensure that people were able to get the education that they absolutely needed for those who were stuck in schools that just unfortunately were not working for them. When we add exceptions beyond the protection of the life of the mother, we take away the notion of the right to life. I am of the opinion that you have a right not to be killed until natural death. Life, the scientific community overwhelmingly agrees, it begins at conception when it's growing, dividing cells of its own unique DNA pattern. So at conception, that is a baby, that is a human being. I don't believe in adding exceptions because I fundamentally believe life begins at conception and every life is entitled to equal protection under the law.
I do. For the life of the mom, there should be an exception. When a person is raped, um, incest, all of these are incomprehensible that somebody would think that you could take and tell a woman what they could do with their body. I honestly don't even understand how Roe versus Wade got overturned in our country. It should not be a state by state thing. It should be it's hurting our doctors too. I personally have had conversations with doctors that are now, you're asking, they have their oath of ethics that they take to save lives, and now you put a law on the book that says they're going to be a criminal if they tried to save a woman's life when it's endangered during a pregnancy. It's just ridiculous, really. It needs to be more realistic. We're not living in a fantasy world that I believe that the extreme right that passed all of these laws for pro-life um, is believing. Yes, I would. I believe that the power to pardon people needs to be limited for violent criminal acts and also for political allies.
That's a difficult question for me. On the one hand, we can see where there were very clear, inappropriate pardons granted. That being said, I'm a firm believer of Blackstone's ratio in our criminal justice system. Blackstone once described that it is preferable that we have a more defendant lenient system in the criminal justice system because we don't want false convictions. We don't want innocent people in jail. We can see with the advent of new DNA evidence that there are innocent people in prison right now. And unfortunately, our Supreme Court federal precedent is that new DNA evidence, new DNA testing methods, that doesn't entitle you to a new trial. That doesn't entitle you to new testing. So the pardon power is one of those few guardrails that still exists. So as a result, I'd have to see the specifics of what we're trying to limit. I can say I heavily disapprove of politically motivated pardons. I heavily disapprove of just this carte blanche pardon power. My opinion is if you're going to pardon someone, you should do it before you're in your lame duck term. One thing I highly respect about President Trump is he has said that on day one, he will commute the sentence of Ross Ulbricht on day one. This isn't something that he's hiding the ball on and he's going to wait until November 2028 to do this. He said he's going to do it on day one. I think we need more people in the executive positions doing so that way the voters know about it and they can make their decisions accordingly. Because I think the number one check on executive pardon powers is the voters' reaction to it. Whether you approve or disapprove of a pardon, you should allow that to inform your decisions in the next election cycle. I'm against government treating people differently based on their race, carte blanche. So I would do away with DEI in its entirety. We absolutely need to, because the reality is this: DEI is just a term. The action, though, of giving different treatment based on race, one, we can look to Students for Fair Admission versus Harvard, the recent Supreme Court decision, and no, this is plainly a violation of the 14th Amendment. We can look at Justice Gorsuch's concurring opinion, which he says this also violates the Civil Rights Act of 1964. One thing that the 14th Amendment and the Civil Rights Act both have in common is that when federal lawsuits occur over them and the plaintiff is victorious, the government has to pay the attorney fees. I'm a fiscal conservative, and I believe that I have a duty to protect the taxpayer from having to pay attorney fees for lawsuits that are completely avoidable. And right now, the DEI programs that we have in Kentucky not only violate Students for Fair Admission versus Harvard, they violate the Bakke decision from all the way back in the 1970s, where the exact term that the Council for Post-Secondary Education calls it is race targeting. That's a point blank quota system that's been unconstitutional for almost 50 years now. And it's a federal lawsuit waiting to happen. I've taken an oath to the Constitution as an attorney. I'll be taking an oath to the Constitution as a legislator. DEI has to go if we want to be in compliance with the 14th Amendment and civil rights obligations.
Well, DEI needs to be thoughtful. Inclusion is very important in education. Everybody should be included and be able to get a fair education, and political biases and unfairness needs to be taken out of considering that, because we live in a world where we are all different and diverse, and everybody should have the right to be able to get an education. I would try to get the new loan packages that are being introduced by banks to come and help first-time home buyers. There's a lot of new packages that they're putting together. I heard on NPR some new loan programs that they're doing, and I know that when I was a real estate agent for 9 years, and so I understand the importance of having different loan products available to first-time home buyers so that they can get into homes to make homes more affordable. Homes need to be made more affordable. Construction needs more tax credits given to them so that they are able to build. Personally, here in Northern Kentucky and Boone County, 17,000 new homes are going up. I see new construction happening every day when I drive to work. I see new apartment buildings coming up, new condos, new single residence homes. So I think a lot has been going on to increase the housing industry, and it's so important for our economy. When the housing industry is being able to flourish and building be able to take place, it uplifts our economy overall. So I would be open to any type of incentive that would help with the housing growth.
So Representative Doan had a bill that he introduced about affordable housing. I'm on board with every part of that bill that made it easier to own a home in Northern Kentucky. I believe home ownership is the fundamental to the American dream. It was the way that the everyday person could enter the market. Taking out another mortgage on a home is the number one way that small businesses would get set up back in the day. But as we have more corporate land ownership, as we have increasing interest rates on property ownership, as we have higher mortgage payments, it's becoming more and more difficult for people, especially in my generation, to own a home. So my top priority is making sure that home ownership is easy. One thing I would fight against is adding a service tax to realtor services, because could be a major hurdle in affordability for new homeowners. I would include tax incentives to new homeowners to ensure that we are able to do that. And further, I would explore legislation that makes it more difficult for corporate land ownership of residential property to occur in Northern Kentucky. I believe that the single family home is just fundamental and it's worth protecting to ensure that we have individuals who own property that they can pass on to their family. I hope to God I'm able to do that when it's my time to go. Yes,
All right.
that's I can discuss that further, but the income tax for me is one of the most immoral taxes because it is the government claiming entitlement to the fruit of your labor. That's for you to keep. Okay, I with consumption taxes, there's ways to avoid those. There's ways to go on it. You don't have to shop in Kentucky. But when it comes to the income tax, I believe you are entitled to keep the fruit of your labor. I don't think we should be punishing productivity. I think one of the most compelling things I've ever noticed is when you look at a tax versus a fine, which is an actual punishment for bad behavior, is usually the tax is much higher than the fine. I think that's a backwards way of financing the government.
I would, and it needs to be done in a gradual way. I think it has to be done in a fiscally responsible manner over a gradual reduction. Um, yes, I just wanted to speak briefly about Con again. I wanted to make the certificate of need that Kentucky has it creates a monopoly for Northern Kentucky. Home births have increased a lot since 1988 to 2021. Home births have increased from 177 to 900, and people are traveling to Indiana and Tennessee to get services because it's so expensive. I honestly believe that bringing in other hospitals and giving other choices here in Northern Kentucky. Northern Kentuckians have to travel to Lexington or travel over to Ohio for additional care because we only have one choice, St. Elizabeth. We should be able to have more choices than St. Elizabeth. I was born at St. Elizabeth. My whole family has gone to St. Elizabeth. I don't have anything against St. Elizabeth. I just feel that we need to have better choices and more choices. We don't have enough choices for healthcare in our area, and that definitely needs to change. Also, I want people to know that I'm going to be transparent and honest in everything that I do for representing and being their voice in our community if I am elected to Kentucky State Representative. I'm all about uplifting Kentucky. That's why I decided to run. I felt like they needed a normal person that was just like one of the citizens here to be able, and my parents always did community service. My mom was a mayor, my father was a city council member, and the importance of giving service back to the community is one of the other reasons why I decided to run for Kentucky State Representative and stand up for education. Education is so important in Kentucky. It's not something that needs to be dismantled or to go away or turned into homeschooling.
I'm the Republican nominee for Kentucky House District 66. I'm a constitutional attorney by trade, and I take my oath to the Constitution literally, that I should never violate it. I believe that the true role of government is the protection of life, liberty, and property. One of the biggest emphases is not necessarily what I'm going to do in Frankfurt, but it's what I don't want to do. I don't want to run your life. I don't want to run your family affairs. I don't believe I know how to run your life better than you do. And I don't believe the Constitution of either Kentucky or the United States gives me the authority to run your life in a way contrary to the way that you would. That being said, I want to make sure that Boone County is represented and that we actually have a voice in Frankfurt. Because right now there are efforts to really mitigate the voice of Kentucky, unfortunately, in our executive branch, whether that be through our budgetary means or just through the priorities of this Commonwealth. I want to make sure that Boone County is punching above its weight class to ensure it gets the representation it deserves.